Okay, welcome to today's lesson here on the French and Indian War and looking at a couple disadvantages for Britain, things that are going to harm them in this war and make it a little bit more difficult for them to win. Which, spoiler alert, they still do win, but these are things that are going to make it much more difficult. And they kind of also tell us some things that are going to need to change in the future in the colonies in general. Let's start off with a little bit of a random looking target here. Chuck Norris stole my car. I guess I was willing to break my own car. As long as it results in Chuck Norris getting struck by lightning, who knows. But our target for today is I can identify key disadvantages that Britain needed to overcome in the French and Indian War. We're going to look at two in particular, being the organization of the colonies and dealing with new battle tactics, given that we're in America and we're fighting in Britain now, was fighting against Native Americans, not only just European powers. So the organization. First, we're going to look at the organization of the colonies itself, talk about the 13 colonies, how they really interacted. Were they a grouping of colonies, or were they really just individualistic and they didn't really want to work together? Second, look at the Native American situation. Third, want to talk about the battle strategies of each different group. And then fourth, a little bit of review with some mental sweat questions that hopefully will help you to fully understand what's going on here with this lesson. Now, quick little recap. What happened, what caused the French and Indian War? Well, we already mentioned it was a disagreement over land ownership in the Ohio Valley. In specific, we had Britain and France both trying to get into this new area, or I shouldn't say new, but area that they hadn't previously colonized, which is right around Pittsburgh, because they both wanted to use the land for the fur trade. Really, really great land with the rivers, some fertile soil, all kinds of animals, and it really was untapped up to this point in time by European powers. In general, though, there was a big rivalry, and that's one thing that you need to really understand here, is that they didn't like each other for a long time, so it makes it pretty easy. When you want the same thing, it's gonna cause a lot of conflict. You could even say that it was inevitable that they were going to go to war, because previously there were 3 battles between France and Britain in America, but none of them really resolved the conflict overall. They would fight a little bit, but no peace really came from it. They still didn't like each other. Now, let's look at some of the specific problems that Britain is going to have in this war. The first one deals with the organization of the colonies. I have these two little pictures here of the same area with the 13 colonies. The difference that I'm trying to portray here is on the left, each colony has their own color, so theoretically they're individual, not working together. And on the right, it's the idea of having the same color as if they work together. What we're going to see is that the one that is really most true for the colonies is this one over here on the left, because most of the colonies did not want to work together. They didn't come here to form their own happy country where everybody works together. They came here for their own personal reasons. And as we've already learned, they're pretty different from one another when you think about the differences between the Massachusetts Bay Colony, founded for Puritan freedom, versus Georgia, which was found for former criminals and debtors, just so they could make some money and get started over again here in America. Very, very different. So those are some things we're going to look at here. Now, the current condition of the colonies is this. They view themselves as being separate from each other. And all colonies have their own government. There is no joint government of the colonies, except you could argue that Britain really is controlling them all, because they were. Now, Benjamin Franklin came up with a plan known as the Albany Plan of Union. And the idea with this was that we're going to get everybody to work together, and we're going to talk about the specifics in a second. But Benjamin Franklin, he's a big deal. I mean, this guy, he's always coming up with stuff. Keep in mind that the date that we're really looking at here with this is we're looking at the 1750s. So when we're looking at all of this stuff, it's 1750 up till really 1763. Which is when we have the Treaty of Paris signed that officially ends the French and Indian War. So that's our time frame. We're going to see Benjamin Franklin. He's super important for a lot of things, going all the way up to the Constitutional Convention, which is in the 1780s. So big deal here, this Benjamin Franklin. Now, the Albany Plan of Union, what was it? Well, the idea was that we want to create a general government for all the colonies. In other words, all the colonies would work together, have one large government, kind of like what we have in America today, where we have different states who have their own deal, but then we also have one United States federal government. That was the idea that he was trying to propose. His idea in specific would set up a grand council. In other words, there would be representatives from each colony that would come together, they would agree on some issues, maybe make some laws, raise taxes, set up an army. Yeah, it sounds great, right? And the reality was that these people, these delegates from each of these states that arrived, now I want you to notice something before I even go any further. Which states aren't sending any representatives? It's all of these ones here, right? That's telling us something, right? Because nobody from the South, except for Maryland, is sending a representative even to hear what's going on here. I think that tells you something that we're going to see as a common theme with a lot of the colonial disagreements, even up through I shouldn't say up through, but up to the Revolutionary War, because the South, they don't want to get involved, because remember what their priorities were, not the same as everybody else's. They were just here to make money, and we're going to see that when there's a conflict up here, they don't feel like it involves them at all. Nonetheless, here's what happens at the meeting for the Albany Plan of Union. All of these delegates come from a lot of different colonies except for the South. They met in Albany, New York, hence the name Albany Plan of Union. They agreed to these things where they'd say, hey, let's set up some laws for the colonies in general. Let's make it so we can raise some taxes so that we can do some really good things here, like have an army to defend ourselves against maybe the Native Americans or France or whomever else. They thought these ideas were great. They said, hey, let's bring them back to our individual colonies. And they did, and then the people from their colonies were like, are you an idiot? That's terrible. We don't want to share power with them. You've got people from Maryland who are, and think about the origins of Maryland. Maryland was built to be a Catholic colony. And then you got people from Massachusetts Bay who are like, they're Catholic. I mean, that's what we fled from Europe. We didn't want the Catholic in the Anglican Church to be influencing us anymore because we didn't agree with it. We want our own religion. We don't really care what they're doing. And then they're saying about some of these colonies, look, they have slaves. In other places, they're saying, no, we don't have slaves. Like Pennsylvania, for instance, was all about freedom and not into the whole slave issue as we progress a little bit further on in history. But nonetheless, we have a lot of these places that are just very, very different from one another. They don't like the idea of sharing power with the other colonies because that's not what they signed up for when they came to America. They signed up for personal gain more so. In some places, just personal separation from everybody else. Great idea on paper, but it didn't really work out because people wouldn't agree to it. As you can see today with our government not agreeing to certain things that are going on, like it happens every other year as well, not just today in 2013. Now, Benjamin Franklin's response was this. Everyone cries a union is necessary, union being uniting of the colonies so they can work together. But when they come to the manner and form of the union, their weak noodles are perfectly distracted. Now, what are their weak noodles? That is their brain. In other words, he's saying, look, you guys are just so weak. Come on, get over it. You're going to have to give something up to get something great. You have to come to that understanding, but nobody could agree to what they would give up. So he ends up creating this political cartoon here that's one of the most famous political cartoons in the history of America, I would say, which says join or die. It's going to be a mental swell question here later on to think about what it means, but I'll give you some hints right now. When we look at the letters that are associated with that snake, there are letters of different colonies in America. We have South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland. You get the point. And the snake, as you notice, is kind of diced up. Why? Because they're saying when the colonies don't work together, we're too weak, we will die. We won't be able to make it. So maybe right now it doesn't seem great, but you know what? There's going to be a conflict at some point in time that's going to require us to work together. And if we don't join, we're doomed. That was his point there. Now, do you agree with Benjamin Franklin on that? Do you think it's going to take the colonies, or what do you think it's going to take to get the colonies to all join together? Is the situation going to need to be really, really, really bad for them to be willing to do something of that nature? Those are some questions to think about. I would suggest pausing for a few seconds here to jot down some ideas as to your opinion on this. Now, that's problem number one. Let's go on to problem number two, which is the fighting style. It's going to change quite a bit. So when we think about the European battle strategy, they were used to open field fighting. So what they would do is they would march slowly towards each other with their guns, shoot them in lines, in order. Guy gets down in front, they have all these rows, everybody shoots, and then everybody gets back up. It's a little bit odd from our current perspective. It takes understanding the weapons to see why this would actually work, because it's not like they have these super accurate machine guns. They're working with these rifles that are very, very inaccurate. And the reality was, at that point in time, they're shooting spherical musket balls, and these balls actually wouldn't always go straight. So you might miss your target if you're aiming at something. You might miss your target by 50 yards in reality, and that's not even a joke, because of how much it would curve. And really, they were inaccurate unless you're pretty close. So that's why they were actually able to march towards each other a little bit. And they actually had bayonets on here because they did use these sharp knife-like edges to their weapon. They used them a lot in battle because sometimes they got that close. It's something weird for us to think about, because we would imagine that if somebody had a machine gun today that had a bayonet on it, they probably wouldn't use the bayonet quite as frequently. But nonetheless, very important at that time period. The natives, on the other hand, they were totally different. They didn't believe in this open field fighting. I mean, to them, it was, why should we do this? We have forests here. We're going to be strategic about it. So what they would do is the British, they'd be marching around through this land, which they didn't really know that well to begin with. They'd be marching through in their formal lines, and the natives would sneak up on them through the woods. And I'm going to show you one specific video that causes some chaos. You guys like that? The guys run around like crazy. But nonetheless, they would try to distort the lines, cause chaos, and then come in for a quick strike and then flee. Their goal wasn't to destroy the entire army. It was just to cause chaos, hit little groups at a time, and then flee back into the woods. And they basically picked the way that they were going to fight this war. It's called guerrilla warfare. Sneak attacks, surprise attacks. And by the way, it's not only used in the past, ladies and gents. Think about the present. Think about what terrorism really is. That's how a lot of these wars are fought. And if you actually want to look at something that's a larger war, Vietnam, that's what the Vietnamese did all the time. It was always about this guerrilla warfare, causing chaos, causing fear, causing panic, because that really helps you to win a war. Now, this quick little video I'm going to show you here in a second is from the movie Last of the Mohicans, and I kind of edited it so there was nothing too bad. But it gives you a little bit of a representation as to how this would actually work. It's pretty scary, actually, if you think about being somebody in this situation. But this specific scene is portraying what was known as the Battle of Fort William Henry. So, show you the video here, and then we'll get back to the lesson. Now, in summary, the war is going to be very difficult for the British to win because of two things. Number one, they have to adjust to the tactics of the natives. That's going to be a very big adjustment for them because they're not used to it. And number two, they need to figure out how to get the colonists involved in this, because the reality is if they bring everybody all the way from Britain, it's going to be really expensive, really hard to do. Plus, it's going to be really hard to support for those people in Britain, because they're saying, why should we fight a war and die over in America for stupid land? Who cares? So getting the people who are closer to this will really help them to actually be able to get more support for the war and to win it. And we're going to see that this war will change America both directly and indirectly forever. And hint, taxes, protection of colonies, that's coming up soon. Someone else, what questions? Number one, explain what the political cartoon is saying. Push pause, answer it, then move on to the next one. Number two, explain what makes guerrilla warfare so effective. Guerrilla warfare being those sneak attacks. Why do sneak attacks work so well? Push pause, 30 seconds, answer it, then come back. And third, why do you think the Albany Plan of Union was not accepted? Think about a few barriers that would exist in uniting the colonies. Again, 30 seconds, pause, then come back. And fourth, list two reasons that only Maryland of the southern colonies sent a delegate to the Albany Congress. 30 seconds, then come back. Oh, and there is one more. And should wars always be avoided, or are they sometimes inevitable? In other words, they're unavoidable. You can't avoid them no matter what. Explain where you think this one, the French Indian War that is, could have been avoided. And that is our last question for the day. So hopefully you got the lesson. If you have any questions, make sure to let me know. All right? Good work.